The greatest truths are never spoken in a throne room. They are whispered where no one believes a king is listening. Dawn had barely touched the eastern horizon when Kieran Blackwood stepped away from the royal carriage and disappeared into the quiet mist beyond the winding road. Behind him, polished armor shimmered with the first traces of morning light as dozens of royal guards waited in disciplined silence, believing their king merely wished to inspect the Carter estate before announcing his arrival. None of them questioned him. They had learned years ago that the Alpha King often trusted silence more than ceremony. Without another word, Kieran removed the dark embroidered coat that marked his station and folded it carefully before handing it to his captain. In its place he slipped into a plain linen shirt, a faded brown vest, worn trousers, and boots carrying the dust of ordinary labor instead of polished royalty. Even the silver wolf crest hanging around his neck disappeared beneath rough fabric. Within moments, the most powerful ruler in the Northern Territories no longer resembled the man whose name could quiet an entire council. He looked like another servant searching for honest work before sunrise. The Carter estate emerged beyond rows of towering oak trees, its white stone walls glowing softly beneath the pale morning sky. Flags fluttered from elegant balconies while gardeners trimmed perfect hedges and stable hands hurried between wagons loaded with flowers, polished silver, and expensive wines. Every corner of the estate whispered preparation. By sunset, they expected to welcome the Alpha King himself. Kieran studied the mansion from the shadows with calm gray eyes that missed nothing. Fresh paint covered cracked columns. New banners concealed weathered stone. Smiles decorated faces already exhausted from pretending everything was perfect. Appearances, he thought quietly, were often the easiest lies to build. Instead of approaching the grand entrance where musicians rehearsed and servants rushed beneath crystal chandeliers, he followed a narrow gravel path leading toward the kitchens behind the estate. Smoke drifted lazily from tall brick chimneys carrying the comforting scent of fresh bread, cinnamon, roasted apples, and warm butter into the cool morning air. Laughter echoed briefly before disappearing beneath sharp commands barked by household supervisors. Life behind the mansion felt more honest than the polished elegance waiting in front. A young stable boy glanced toward Kieran before pointing casually toward stacked wooden crates. "New help?" he asked. Kieran simply nodded. "Kitchen entrances around back," the boy replied without another thought, already hurrying toward restless horses. That was all it took. No announcement. No bow. No titles. Just another stranger among dozens of invisible workers. Kieran stepped through the open service gate where cooks hurried past carrying baskets overflowing with vegetables, flour, and herbs. No one recognized him. No one looked twice. It felt strangely peaceful. For years people had measured every word spoken in his presence. Every compliment carried ambition. Every smile concealed expectation. Every conversation bent beneath the weight of his crown. But here, surrounded by ordinary voices and hurried footsteps, he became invisible for the first time in years. Invisible enough to discover truths no royal reception would ever reveal. Somewhere inside this sprawling estate lived Evelyn Carter, the woman every noble family insisted would become his future wife. The reports described her as quiet, obedient, modest, suitable. Reports always sounded perfect. Real people rarely did. Kieran had refused to choose a queen through carefully rehearsed introductions and expensive gowns. If she were kind only because she stood before a king, he needed to know. If she respected only crowns instead of people, he needed to know that too. A kingdom could survive harsh winters and empty harvests, but it could never survive a queen whose heart changed with another person's status. As he lifted a heavy wooden crate onto his shoulder and followed the stream of servants through the back corridor, distant voices drifted from somewhere deeper inside the house. One voice carried warmth despite obvious fatigue, soft enough to calm even the busiest room. Kieran slowed almost without realizing it. He had not yet seen the woman promised to become his bride. But for reasons he could not explain, something inside him whispered that the day had already begun to change both of their lives. Evelyn Carter had learned long ago that the quietest people often carried the heaviest burdens. Before the sun had fully risen above the oak trees surrounding the estate, She was already moving through the great kitchen with practiced grace, tying back loose strands of her chestnut hair beneath a simple cream-colored scarf while balancing a basket of warm bread against her hip. The servants greeted her with grateful smiles that disappeared whenever footsteps from the main house echoed down the corridor. The Carter family expected perfection today. Every silver tray had to shine. Every flower had to face the same direction. Every curtain had to be tied with matching ribbons. The Alpha King was expected before nightfall, and everyone believed the future of the family depended on making the right impression. Everyone except Evelyn. She quietly arranged fresh herbs beside the cooks without asking for recognition. She carried pitchers of cool spring water from the courtyard well, folded fresh linen napkins until every corner aligned perfectly, and paused only to help an elderly baker lift a heavy iron pan onto the stove. When he thanked her with tired eyes, she answered with the same gentle smile she offered everyone, whether they wore fine silk or rough work clothes. Kindness had never seemed valuable inside the Carter estate, but it was the only treasure she truly possessed. From somewhere upstairs, elegant laughter drifted through the open windows. Her older sister, Victoria Carter, was already preparing for the evening, surrounded by expensive dresses, sparkling jewelry, and endless compliments from their mother. Evelyn could almost picture the scene without seeing it. Her mother would adjust every ribbon while reminding Victoria to stand tall, smile softly, and never appear uncertain before royalty. Their father would rehearse polished greetings in front of a mirror, carefully choosing words meant to impress a king he had never met. Meanwhile, Evelyn had been instructed to remain out of sight. She was not to enter the ballroom. She was not to greet any guests. If anyone asked, she would simply be another servant helping prepare the celebration. The explanation had been delivered gently enough to sound reasonable, yet it settled inside her heart with familiar weight. She was not considered embarrassing because of anything she had done. She simply lacked the confidence, beauty, and noble presence her family believed a future queen should possess. At least, that was what they repeated often enough for everyone to believe it, including themselves. Evelyn lifted another basket and crossed the narrow hallway leading toward the pantry when she noticed a new servant carrying a wooden crate near the back entrance. His clothes were plain, dust clinging naturally to worn boots, but something about him seemed different. He moved without rushing despite the busy morning. His posture remained calm while everyone else hurried from one task to another. Most unusual of all, his eyes quietly observed every corner of the estate as though memorizing details no one else noticed. She slowed for only a moment before offering the same warm smile she had shared with every newcomer over the years. "You must be new," she said softly. "The mornings here can be overwhelming. The fresh bread is on the left table if you have not had breakfast yet." Without waiting for praise or gratitude, she reached into her basket and placed a warm roll wrapped in a clean cloth beside him. "You should eat while it is still warm. Work is always easier on a full stomach." Then she continued down the hallway before he could answer, already responding to another servant who needed help carrying folded tablecloths. Kieran watched her disappear around the corner, still holding the warm bread in his hands. No hesitation. No curiosity about his background. No calculation. She had treated him exactly as she treated everyone else. For the first time since entering the estate, the carefully constructed expectations surrounding his visit began to shift. Perhaps the woman hidden from the grand ballroom had already revealed more of herself in 30 quiet seconds than an evening filled with rehearsed introductions ever could. The hours slipped quietly toward noon, and the Carter estate became louder with every passing minute. Wagons rolled across the stone courtyard carrying fresh flowers, polished furniture, and expensive fabrics borrowed from neighboring estates determined to impress the royal court. Servants hurried through endless hallways balancing crystal glasses, silver trays, and embroidered tablecloths while housekeepers inspected every room as though a single speck of dust could destroy the family's future. Yet amid the frantic movement, one person remained almost invisible. Evelyn moved from room to room with steady patience, replacing wilted flowers before anyone noticed, straightening crooked paintings, carrying stacks of freshly pressed linens upstairs, and quietly thanking every servant who worked beside her. She never gave orders. She simply noticed where help was needed and stepped in before anyone asked. Kieran watched from a respectful distance as he carried crates through the service corridors, blending naturally among the household staff. The more he observed, the stranger the family appeared. Whenever guests or merchants entered through the front doors, Lord Nathaniel Carter transformed into a picture of warmth and dignity, greeting everyone with polished manners and generous smiles. Lady Beatrice Carter floated beside him with graceful elegance, speaking proudly about their family's honor and traditions. But the moment visitors disappeared from sight, those smiles vanished like morning fog. Their voices became sharper. Their expectations heavier. Every instruction carried impatience hidden beneath polite words. Victoria Carter descended the grand staircase shortly before lunch wearing a pale blue gown trimmed with delicate silver embroidery. Even without jewels, she looked every bit the noble daughter her parents admired. Lady Beatrice adjusted the folds of her skirt before gently lifting Victoria's chin. "Remember," she said with quiet satisfaction, "when the Alpha King arrives, confidence matters more than beauty. Walk slowly. Speak softly. Let him believe this house has raised a woman worthy of standing beside a throne." Victoria smiled at her reflection. He will not even notice anyone else. Standing behind them with folded towels resting in her arms, Evelyn lowered her eyes before either of them could acknowledge her presence. She had heard similar conversations many times before. Today they simply carried greater importance. Lord Carter finally noticed her standing near the doorway. "Evelyn," he called without anger, though his tone carried unmistakable disappointment. "Remain in the service wing after the guests arrive. There is no reason for unnecessary confusion. We cannot risk distracting His Majesty during such an important evening." Evelyn answered exactly as she always did. "Yes, Father." She did not argue. She did not ask why. Quiet acceptance had become easier than hoping for different answers. As she turned to leave, Victoria glanced toward her younger sister with something almost resembling sympathy. "Perhaps after tonight," she said gently, "everything will finally become easier for all of us." Evelyn offered a small smile that never quite reached her eyes. "I hope so," she replied sincerely before continuing down the hallway. Kieran remained hidden behind a partially opened pantry door, his hand still resting on the wooden crate he had been carrying. The conversation settled heavily in his thoughts. There had been no shouting, no cruelty, only calm words wrapped in quiet exclusion. Somehow that made the loneliness feel even deeper. Evelyn had not been forbidden because she lacked kindness. She had been hidden because her own family believed she was not impressive enough to be seen. A few minutes later, as Kieran entered the kitchen again, he noticed Evelyn kneeling beside an elderly housemaid whose hands trembled while gathering scattered spoons from the floor. Without hesitation, Evelyn knelt beside her, helping collect each piece while speaking so softly that the older woman's anxious expression slowly relaxed into grateful relief. When the task was finished, Evelyn slipped the woman a small apple from her apron pocket. "Please eat before you become dizzy again," she whispered. "You have been working since sunrise." The elderly maid smiled with tearful eyes and squeezed Evelyn's hand. Kieran looked down at the untouched bread she had given him earlier that morning. In palaces, loyalty was often purchased with gold. Here, a single warm roll and a quiet act of compassion seemed to earn something far more valuable. And for the first time since accepting this arranged engagement, the Alpha King found himself wondering whether everyone in this estate had misunderstood who truly deserved to stand in the light. The afternoon sun spilled through the tall kitchen windows, painting long ribbons of golden light across the worn stone floor as the estate settled into the tense rhythm that always arrived before distinguished guests. Every clock seemed to tick louder. Every servant walked faster. Every conversation ended with nervous glances toward the front courtyard where the royal procession was expected before evening. Kieran continued carrying sacks of flour and wooden barrels between the storage rooms without drawing attention, quietly accepting directions from the kitchen steward like any newly hired worker. The disguise had become surprisingly effortless. No one questioned him. No one bowed. No one carefully measured every sentence before speaking. It reminded him how differently people behaved when they believed power was absent. As he stepped into the cool pantry searching for another basket of apples, he heard the soft creak of the back door opening behind him. Evelyn entered carrying a small tray with a steaming kettle, fresh tea, and several neatly folded towels balanced carefully in her hands. She paused when she noticed him reaching awkwardly toward a high shelf. "You are taller than everyone else here," she said with a quiet laugh that carried genuine warmth instead of mockery. "Perhaps they gave you the difficult jobs on purpose." Kieran smiled faintly, surprised by how naturally the expression came. "Perhaps they did." She set the tray down and reached for a wooden stool. "Be careful with that shelf. One of the brackets is loose. It has been waiting for repairs for weeks." He glanced upward before carefully stepping back. A second later the old bracket shifted slightly beneath the weight of a heavy basket. Without her warning, it would almost certainly have fallen. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Evelyn simply nodded as though helping someone avoid unnecessary trouble required no special recognition. She poured hot tea into a plain ceramic cup and gently pushed it toward him. "You have been working since early morning. Please take a short break before someone finds another impossible task for you." Kieran accepted the cup, feeling its comforting warmth against his hands. "You seem to spend more time helping everyone else than resting yourself." Evelyn smiled softly while arranging the folded towels into neat stacks. "The work becomes lighter when people share it." Her answer was simple, spoken without pride or expectation, as though it described something as ordinary as the weather. For a brief moment silence settled comfortably between them. Outside, birds sang from the oak trees surrounding the estate while distant voices echoed across the courtyard. The peaceful pause felt strangely untouched by the frantic preparations consuming the rest of the mansion. Kieran noticed a faint red mark near Evelyn's wrist where a heavy basket had apparently rested for hours. "You should let someone else carry the larger loads," he said. Evelyn glanced at the mark before gently brushing it aside. "There are older servants here whose backs hurt more than my arm. They have cared for this house longer than I have. They deserve easier work." Kieran looked at her carefully. She answered every question by thinking about someone else first. It was not practiced humility. It was simply the way she viewed the world. Before he could speak again, hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway. A young maid rushed inside, breathing quickly. "Miss Evelyn, Lady Beatrice is asking for fresh flowers in the blue drawing room immediately." Evelyn answered without complaint. "I will be there in just a moment." The maid hurried away as quickly as she had arrived. Evelyn turned back toward Kieran and noticed a small tear along the cuff of his plain work shirt. Without hesitation she reached into the pocket of her apron and removed a tiny sewing kit held together by faded blue thread. "May I?" she asked politely. Kieran gave a quiet nod. Standing a respectful distance away, she carefully repaired the loose seam with calm, practiced movements. Her attention remained entirely on the fabric, never lingering longer than necessary, treating the simple task with the same care she had shown every person throughout the day. When she finished, she stepped back with a gentle smile. "There. It should last much longer now." She gathered her tray and disappeared into the hallway before he could find the right words to thank her. Kieran remained standing alone in the pantry, lightly touching the neatly repaired cuff. The finest tailors in the kingdom had crafted robes worth fortunes for him, yet somehow a few careful stitches sewn by unseen hands carried more meaning than any royal garment he had ever worn. The shadows across the courtyard stretched longer as the afternoon slowly surrendered to early evening, and excitement spread through the Carter estate like the first breeze before a summer storm. Servants polished the final pieces of silver until every candle holder reflected warm light. Musicians quietly tuned their instruments beneath the covered terrace. Elegant floral arrangements filled every hallway with the fragrance of white roses and fresh lavender. Everywhere Kieran looked, people prepared for the arrival of a king they believed had not yet reached the estate. The quiet irony almost made him smile. He was already standing among them, carrying another wooden crate through the back corridor while conversations drifted freely around him, completely untouched by fear or ceremony. He found Evelyn once again in the small herb garden behind the kitchen, carefully gathering fresh rosemary and thyme into a woven basket. The garden rested behind a low stone wall where the sounds of the busy estate faded into peaceful silence. For the first time all day, she appeared completely alone. As she reached toward a taller branch, one of the rose vines caught the sleeve of her dress. She gently untangled the fabric before noticing Kieran approaching with the empty crate. "You have been working without stopping," she said with quiet concern. "Please set that down for a moment." Before he could answer, she disappeared into the kitchen and returned carrying a small cloth bundle. She unfolded it to reveal 2 simple oatmeal cookies that had cooled beside the ovens only minutes earlier. "The cooks always make a few extra," she explained. "Most people are too busy to remember they are hungry until it is too late." She held one cookie toward him with the same natural kindness she had shown from the moment they met. Kieran accepted it, noticing she kept the smaller one for herself without hesitation or self-pity. They sat on the low stone wall facing the peaceful garden while birds fluttered between flowering shrubs. It was the first quiet moment either of them had shared all day. "Does everyone here work this hard?" Kieran asked. Evelyn looked toward the busy windows of the mansion where servants hurried past carrying trays. "Most of them do. Today matters to everyone. They all hope something good will come from tonight." She paused before adding with a faint smile, "Hope has a way of making people stronger than sleep ever could." Kieran studied her thoughtful expression. "And what do you hope for?" The question lingered softly between them. Evelyn lowered her eyes to the cookie resting in her hands. "Nothing extraordinary," she admitted. "I hope the people who work here feel appreciated someday. I hope my father finds the peace he is always searching for. I hope my sister is truly happy, no matter what happens tonight." She laughed quietly at herself before taking another small bite. "I suppose my wishes are not very exciting." "You forgot to include yourself," Kieran observed gently. Evelyn seemed surprised by the remark. After a thoughtful silence she answered honestly. "I have spent so many years hoping for other people that I never became very good at wishing for myself." The words settled deeply inside Kieran's heart. There had been no bitterness in her voice. No complaint. Only quiet acceptance shaped by years of placing everyone else before herself. A cool breeze stirred the branches overhead, carrying a few rose petals across the stone path between them. Evelyn noticed a faint scrape across the back of Kieran's hand where rough wood from one of the crates had left a shallow mark earlier in the afternoon. Without saying a word, she reached into the pocket of her apron and removed a small tin containing homemade herbal salve. "May I?" she asked politely. When he nodded, she carefully applied a tiny amount across the scrape with remarkable gentleness. "It will keep the skin from drying," she explained. "My grandmother taught me how to make it years ago." Her hands moved with calm confidence before she closed the tin and slipped it into his palm instead of returning it to her pocket. "Keep it. New workers always end the first week with sore hands." Kieran looked down at the small weathered container resting in his hand. No one had ever offered him something so ordinary with such complete sincerity. She believed he was a servant with no influence, no fortune, and no importance beyond today's labor, yet she gave him one of the few useful things she carried because she thought he might need it more than she did. In that quiet garden hidden behind the grand estate, surrounded by herbs instead of jewels and simple conversation instead of carefully rehearsed compliments, the Alpha King began to understand that the greatest measure of a person's heart was revealed not by how they treated royalty, but by how they cared for someone they believed the world would never notice. As twilight settled gently over the Carter estate, hundreds of lanterns flickered to life one by one, casting a warm golden glow across the gardens and stone walkways. From the front lawn came the distant sounds of musicians rehearsing elegant melodies while guests from neighboring territories began arriving in polished carriages. Laughter floated through the evening air, blending with the scent of fresh pine, blooming roses, and the rich aroma of roasted herbs drifting from the kitchens. Every corner of the estate shimmered with anticipation. Yet hidden beyond the celebration, the quiet service corridor remained almost untouched by the excitement. Kieran carried a basket of folded table linens toward the dining hall when he noticed Evelyn standing alone beside an open window overlooking the western fields. For the first time that day, there were no trays in her hands and no one calling her name. She simply watched the fading sunlight disappear beyond the distant hills, as though stealing one peaceful moment before the evening transformed the entire house. Hearing footsteps behind her, she turned and smiled when she recognized the new servant. "You found a quiet place too," she said softly. Kieran rested the basket beside the wall. "It seems difficult to find one today." Evelyn laughed quietly. "The whole house has forgotten how to breathe." They stood together watching the last streaks of orange fade into deep blue across the sky. After a thoughtful silence, Kieran asked, "Does tonight make you nervous?" Evelyn considered the question longer than he expected. "Not because of the celebration," she answered honestly. "People become nervous when they are afraid of making mistakes. I am afraid of something else." Kieran turned toward her. "What is that?" She folded her hands together as the evening breeze gently stirred loose strands of her chestnut hair. "Everyone keeps talking about the Alpha King as though he is only a crown, a title, or a legend. They discuss alliances, influence, wealth, and power." She looked down for a brief moment before continuing. "No one seems to wonder whether he becomes lonely. No one asks whether he is kind. Sometimes I think people forget that even kings wake up carrying burdens no one else can see." Kieran remained perfectly still. In countless royal meetings he had heard endless opinions about his strength, his authority, and his victories. Never once had anyone wondered whether he carried loneliness behind the crown. Evelyn continued quietly, unaware of the storm her words had awakened inside him. "I know almost nothing about him. Perhaps the stories are true. Perhaps they are not. But I hope that whoever becomes his wife sees the man before she sees the throne." She smiled faintly, almost embarrassed by her own thoughts. "Maybe that sounds foolish." "No," Kieran replied with unusual softness. "It sounds rare." She looked at him curiously. "If you were meeting someone important for the first time, what would you hope they noticed about you?" The question caught him completely unprepared. For years every introduction had been shaped by protocol. No one had ever asked what he personally wished another human being would see. After a long pause he answered carefully. "I suppose I would hope they judged my choices instead of my title." Evelyn's gentle smile grew warmer. "Then perhaps we hope for the same thing." A bell echoed through the mansion, signaling that the final preparations were complete. Servants hurried past the hallway once again, carrying polished trays toward the grand ballroom. Evelyn picked up the folded linens beside Kieran before he could stop her. "Come on," she said kindly. "If we disappear much longer, someone will think we escaped." As they walked side by side through the corridor, voices drifted from a nearby drawing room where the heavy door had been left slightly open. Lord Nathaniel Carter and Lady Beatrice were speaking in hushed tones, believing no one remained nearby. Evelyn smiled politely toward Kieran before carrying the linens farther down the hallway, unaware that he had slowed his pace just enough for the quiet conversation behind the door to reach his ears. Without intending to listen, Kieran caught the first unmistakable sentence spoken inside the room, and the calm warmth that had filled his heart only moments earlier began to give way to a growing sense that tonight was about to reveal far more than anyone had planned. The voices beyond the half-open drawing room door were calm, measured, and carefully controlled, yet every word carried enough weight to stop Kieran where he stood. He remained hidden by the narrow hallway, the basket of folded linen still resting naturally against his arm as another pair of servants hurried past without noticing him. Inside the room, Lord Nathaniel Carter exhaled slowly before speaking. "Everything depends on Victoria tonight. If she leaves the right impression, the Carter name will stand beside the throne for generations." Lady Beatrice answered without hesitation. "She will. We have prepared her for this moment since she was a child." There was a brief pause before her voice lowered even further. "My only concern is Evelyn." Kieran felt his attention sharpen. "She has always been too soft," Lady Beatrice continued. She would probably speak to the Alpha King the same way she speaks to stable boys and kitchen servants. She does not understand rank. Nathaniel released a quiet sigh. Which is exactly why she must remain invisible. If His Majesty sees her wandering through the halls, smiling at everyone and asking whether they have eaten, he may think we have no discipline in this household. Lady Beatrice gave a faint, humorless laugh. She would probably offer him fresh bread before greeting him properly. Neither of them realized how painfully accurate those words already were. Kieran remembered the warm roll wrapped in clean cloth that still rested untouched inside his work bag. Nathaniel continued, "If anyone asks, Evelyn has been helping with preparations all day in the service wing. She will remain there until the evening is over." "And afterward?" Lady Beatrice asked. "Afterward nothing changes. Victoria will become queen, our alliance will be secured, and Evelyn can continue exactly as she always has. Quiet people are useful because they rarely question where they belong." Kieran felt something unexpectedly heavy settle inside his chest. There was no anger in Nathaniel's voice. No hatred. Only certainty. They had convinced themselves that Evelyn's kindness made her unworthy of standing beside greatness. Before another word could be spoken, footsteps echoed from the opposite hallway. Kieran calmly adjusted the basket in his hands and continued walking before anyone noticed he had paused. He rounded the corner just as Evelyn emerged from another corridor carrying fresh candles for the ballroom. She greeted him with the same gentle smile she had offered all day, completely unaware of the conversation that had unfolded only a few yards away. "You look tired," she said softly. "There is a pitcher of cool cider in the kitchen if you have a chance before the guests arrive." Kieran looked at her for a long moment. He wanted to ask whether she knew what her parents truly believed. He wanted to ask why she accepted being hidden from a future that technically belonged to her family as much as anyone else's. Instead, he asked the only question that felt honest. "Does it ever bother you when people overlook you?" Evelyn blinked in quiet surprise before thinking carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I have learned something." She adjusted the candles in her arms before continuing. "People often notice titles before they notice hearts. That is unfortunate, but it does not give me permission to stop being kind." She smiled gently. "Someone has to begin seeing people differently. Otherwise nothing ever changes." Kieran stood speechless. Those simple words carried more wisdom than countless speeches he had heard inside royal councils. Evelyn glanced toward the front windows where the first elegant carriages rolled through the estate gates. Lanterns reflected across polished black coaches while musicians straightened nervously beneath the grand entrance. "The Alpha King will be here soon," she whispered almost to herself. Her expression softened with quiet hope instead of excitement. "I truly hope someone welcomes him because he is a person before he is a king." She offered Kieran one last warm smile before carrying the candles toward the ballroom, disappearing once again into the endless movement of the evening. Kieran remained alone in the hallway, watching her walk away while the sounds of arriving guests filled the estate. She had no idea that the man she hoped would be welcomed as a human being had already heard every word she never intended for a king to hear. The last rays of daylight disappeared beyond the distant hills as the Carter estate transformed into a sea of glowing lanterns and polished crystal. Elegant guests filled the grand ballroom with graceful conversation while musicians played soft melodies that drifted through every corridor. Outside, royal banners fluttered in the cool evening breeze, signaling that the official escort of the Alpha King would arrive within minutes. Inside the service wing, however, the pace only grew faster. Servants hurried from room to room carrying silver pitchers, trays of fresh pastries, steaming tea, and delicate porcelain that reflected the golden candlelight. Kieran remained among them without drawing a second glance, quietly carrying another stack of serving platters toward the banquet hall. The disguise still held perfectly. Yet after everything he had witnessed that day, he no longer felt like an observer. Every conversation, every smile, every act of kindness from Evelyn had begun reshaping expectations he had carried for weeks. As he entered the smaller dining corridor, he found Evelyn arranging fresh candles along a side table reserved for the household staff. Unlike the grand ballroom, this quiet room would never be seen by distinguished guests, yet she adjusted every candle until each flame stood perfectly straight. Most people would never notice this room, Kieran said as he placed the platters beside her. Evelyn smiled without looking up. Perhaps not. But the people serving dinner will eat here later tonight. They deserve something beautiful too. Her answer settled warmly in the quiet room. She stepped back to admire the simple arrangement before noticing the thoughtful expression on his face. You have been unusually quiet, she observed. Are you worried about meeting so many important people? Kieran hesitated before asking the question that had lingered in his mind since their conversation by the window. May I ask you something? Evelyn nodded. Of course. He looked directly into her kind blue eyes. If tomorrow you learned that the person standing beside you today was not a servant at all, but someone with great wealth and influence, would it change the way you treated him? She blinked with gentle surprise, then laughed so softly that the sound almost disappeared beneath the distant music. I hope not. She rested her hands lightly against the edge of the table while considering her answer more carefully. People change clothes every day. They gain titles, lose titles, inherit fortunes, or lose everything they own. None of those things tell me whether they will keep their promises, show compassion, or speak honestly. She looked at him with complete sincerity. Character lasts much longer than status. Kieran remained silent. Evelyn continued with quiet confidence. If someone is kind only after discovering another person's importance, then perhaps they were never truly kind in the first place. The simple truth of her words left no room for argument. Before he could respond, hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway. A young footman appeared, slightly out of breath. Miss Evelyn, he called. Lady Beatrice wants you upstairs immediately. She says there is a problem with one of Lady Victoria's gowns. Evelyn nodded without complaint. I will be there right away. She turned back toward Kieran with the same warm expression she had shown since morning. Please remember to eat something before the evening becomes too busy. You cannot help everyone if you forget to take care of yourself. Then she disappeared into the hallway, her footsteps fading toward the grand staircase. Kieran watched her leave until she vanished from sight. Moments later, another servant rushed through the corridor carrying urgent news that spread from room to room in excited whispers. The royal escort had crossed the front gates. Every noble guest hurried toward the ballroom believing the Alpha King would soon make his entrance through the grand doors. Only one man in the entire estate knew the truth. The king was already inside, still dressed in plain linen, and after hearing Evelyn's unwavering belief that character mattered more than a crown, he made one silent decision. He would not reveal himself yet. One final truth remained hidden within this house, and before the night was over, he intended to uncover it with his own eyes. The grand ballroom shimmered beneath hundreds of crystal chandeliers, their golden light reflecting across polished marble floors as noble families gathered in elegant circles, speaking in careful voices filled with anticipation. Every guest turned toward the towering entrance each time the massive doors shifted, convinced the Alpha King would appear at any moment. Musicians played graceful melodies while servants moved silently between the crowded tables carrying silver trays filled with sparkling cider, fresh fruit, and delicate pastries. Hidden among them, Kieran continued wearing the plain clothes of an ordinary servant, quietly observing the people who had spent the entire day preparing to impress a king they had never truly expected to understand. From his place near the banquet tables, he watched Victoria Carter glide through the ballroom with practiced elegance, greeting influential guests with perfect posture and polished conversation. Lord Nathaniel and Lady Beatrice remained close behind, smiling proudly as compliments followed their eldest daughter wherever she walked. To every visitor, the Carter family appeared united, gracious, and flawless. Yet beyond the bright lights, near the side corridor leading back toward the service wing, Evelyn quietly arranged empty serving trays for the kitchen staff, remaining exactly where her parents had instructed her to stay. She worked with the same gentle attention she had shown since sunrise, unnoticed by nearly everyone around her. A few minutes later, one of the younger footmen hurried toward her carrying obvious concern across his face. Miss Evelyn, he whispered nervously, we have run out of fresh flower arrangements near the east staircase. The housekeeper said there are extras in the conservatory, but I cannot leave my station. Evelyn answered without hesitation. I will bring them. She immediately turned toward the glass conservatory while the young footman returned gratefully to his duties. Kieran noticed the exchange and quietly followed at a respectful distance, curiosity urging him forward. The conservatory stood peacefully at the edge of the estate, filled with fragrant lilies, climbing roses, and flowering vines glowing softly beneath hanging lanterns. Evelyn carefully selected several fresh arrangements, making certain each bouquet looked balanced before placing them into a wicker basket. As she prepared to leave, voices drifted through the open doorway connecting the conservatory to a private sitting room. Lord Nathaniel, Lady Beatrice, and Victoria had stepped inside without realizing Evelyn was only a few yards away, hidden behind rows of flowering shrubs. Everything is proceeding perfectly, Lady Beatrice said with quiet satisfaction. As long as Evelyn stays out of sight. Victoria hesitated before speaking. Do we really need to keep sending her away? She has worked harder than anyone today. Nathaniel answered calmly. This evening is about securing our family's future. If His Majesty notices your sister before meeting you, unnecessary questions could arise. Evelyn has always struggled to make the proper impression. Lady Beatrice added gently, she belongs where she feels most comfortable, helping behind the scenes. Not every daughter is meant to stand beside a throne. Evelyn stood completely still, her hands tightening around the basket handle. She had heard similar words before, yet hearing them spoken so casually on this night carried a different weight. After a long, quiet breath, she lowered her eyes, carefully lifted the flowers, and turned away before anyone inside realized she had been nearby. No tears appeared. No anger crossed her face. Only a familiar sadness settled quietly behind her gentle smile. Kieran remained hidden in the shadows of the hallway, watching everything unfold without being seen. He expected disappointment. Instead, what he witnessed next surprised him even more. As Evelyn returned toward the ballroom, she noticed the anxious young footman waiting where she had left him. Seeing his worried expression, she smiled warmly and handed him the finest bouquet from her basket. These will look beautiful, she said encouragingly. Do not worry. You are doing a wonderful job. The young man relaxed immediately, thanking her with visible relief before hurrying away. Evelyn continued carrying the remaining flowers toward the staircase with steady grace, offering comfort to someone else only moments after quietly accepting hurt herself. Kieran watched her disappear into the warm glow of the ballroom, and for the first time that evening, he realized the greatest strength inside the Carter estate was not standing beneath the chandeliers hoping to be admired. It was walking silently through the shadows, choosing kindness even when no one thought it deserved to be seen. The music stopped so suddenly that the silence felt louder than the orchestra had only a heartbeat before. Every conversation inside the grand ballroom dissolved into curious whispers as the massive front doors slowly opened. Royal guards wearing the black and silver crest of the Northern Territories entered first in two perfectly ordered lines, their polished armor catching the warm light from hundreds of candles. Behind them walked the captain of the Royal Guard carrying a ceremonial staff carved with the ancient wolf emblem. Lord Nathaniel Carter immediately stepped forward with Lady Beatrice and Victoria beside him, each lowering their heads respectfully as every noble guest followed their example. A ripple of excitement swept across the room. His Majesty has arrived, someone whispered. Yet no king followed the procession. The captain stopped at the center of the ballroom and calmly surveyed the room before speaking in a steady voice. His Majesty requested a brief moment before making his entrance. Confused murmurs spread through the gathered guests. Nathaniel forced a polite smile while trying to hide his growing uncertainty. Victoria maintained her graceful posture, though her fingers tightened ever so slightly around the folds of her elegant gown. Across the room, Evelyn quietly remained near the service entrance holding a silver tray prepared for the arriving escort. No one noticed her. No one expected her to matter. Kieran stood only a few feet away among the servants, still dressed in the same plain linen shirt and faded brown vest he had worn since sunrise. Throughout the evening he had watched carefully, allowing every conversation, every quiet decision, and every unnoticed act of kindness to reveal the true character of the people gathered before him. He had seen ambition wrapped in polished manners. He had witnessed compassion hidden behind simple work clothes. There was nothing left for him to question. He slowly placed the serving tray he had been carrying onto a nearby table and looked once toward Evelyn. She was helping an elderly servant straighten a slightly crooked tablecloth, completely unaware that every choice she had made throughout the day had already changed the course of the evening. The captain's eyes found Kieran across the crowded ballroom. Without speaking a single word, he lowered his head. One by one, every royal guard followed the silent gesture. The movement was subtle at first, almost unnoticed, until dozens of armored soldiers stood with their heads respectfully bowed toward the ordinary servant standing quietly near the service entrance. The room fell completely still. Lord Nathaniel frowned in confusion. Lady Beatrice looked from the guards to the unfamiliar servant, unable to understand what she was seeing. Victoria's practiced smile slowly disappeared. Kieran took one calm step forward. Then another. His posture changed almost imperceptibly, yet every movement carried the quiet confidence of someone who had never needed to announce authority because true authority walked beside him wherever he went. He reached beneath the collar of his simple linen shirt and drew out the silver wolf crest that had remained hidden all day. The polished emblem caught the candlelight, shining with unmistakable brilliance. A quiet gasp swept across the ballroom. The captain of the guard spoke clearly enough for every guest to hear. "Your Majesty." In perfect unison, every royal guard knelt. The sound of armored boots touching polished marble echoed through the silent hall like a single heartbeat. Noble guests stared in disbelief before hurriedly lowering themselves as well. Lord Nathaniel's face drained of color. Lady Beatrice instinctively stepped backward. Victoria stood frozen, unable to move as the impossible truth unfolded before her eyes. Only Evelyn remained standing. She had not ignored protocol. She simply could not make sense of what she was seeing. Her eyes met Kieran's across the crowded ballroom, searching for the familiar servant who had shared warm bread, quiet conversations, and peaceful moments hidden behind the kitchens. He was still there. The kindness in his expression had not changed. Only the truth surrounding him had. Kieran offered her the same gentle smile she had first given him that morning before turning his calm gaze toward the astonished Carter family. After an entire day spent discovering who people became when they believed no king was watching, the Alpha King was finally ready to reveal what he had learned. No one moved. Hundreds of people remained frozen beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, unable to reconcile the quiet servant who had carried wooden crates all day with the Alpha King now standing before them. The silence stretched until Kieran Blackwood slowly walked toward the center of the ballroom, his calm expression revealing neither anger nor triumph. He stopped only a few feet from Lord Nathaniel Carter and looked around the magnificent hall that had been prepared in his honor. "This estate is beautiful," he said evenly. "Its gardens are carefully tended. Its tables are filled with generous food. Its guests have been welcomed with remarkable attention." Lord Nathaniel swallowed nervously before forcing a hopeful smile. "Your Majesty, we are deeply honored that you have graced our home." Kieran's silver eyes rested on him without changing. "I agree that I have learned much about your home today." Those simple words caused visible uneasiness to ripple across the Carter family. Lady Beatrice lowered her gaze while Victoria stood perfectly still, uncertain whether she should speak. Kieran continued at the same measured pace. "Since sunrise I have entered your kitchens, your gardens, your service corridors, and your storerooms. I have carried supplies beside your workers. I have shared bread with your servants. I have listened far more than I have spoken." Soft whispers spread among the gathered nobles. None of them had imagined their king had spent the entire day unnoticed inside the estate. "It is remarkable," Kieran continued, "how honestly people speak when they believe no crown is listening." Lord Nathaniel's shoulders visibly stiffened. Kieran turned his attention toward the assembled guests instead of raising his voice. I witnessed loyal servants treated with respect by one person who expected nothing in return. I watched an elderly housemaid receive kindness instead of impatience. I saw tired workers offered food before they asked for it. I received help before anyone knew my name. His gaze slowly found Evelyn, who still stood quietly near the service entrance holding the now forgotten silver tray. Every act came from the same person. Evelyn lowered her eyes, clearly uncomfortable becoming the center of attention. Kieran looked back toward Nathaniel and Beatrice. I also heard conversations that revealed another truth. The room became completely silent once more. I heard plans to hide one daughter because kindness was mistaken for weakness. I heard compassion described as an embarrassment. I heard a family believe that appearances carried greater value than character. Lady Beatrice's face paled. Nathaniel opened his mouth as though searching for an explanation, but no words came. Kieran lifted one hand slightly, not to accuse, but simply to stop unnecessary excuses before they began. Do not fear. I am not here to shame anyone. His calm voice somehow carried even greater authority than anger ever could. Every family makes mistakes. Every person has blind places within the heart. The question is not whether we have them. The question is whether we are willing to recognize them when the truth quietly stands before us. The assembled nobles exchanged thoughtful glances. Many lowered their eyes, reflecting on their own assumptions throughout the evening. Kieran turned once again toward Evelyn. Today you believed I was an ordinary servant. You shared your meal without hesitation. You repaired my clothing. You worried whether I had eaten. You offered comfort when you believed I possessed neither influence nor wealth. Evelyn finally looked up, her blue eyes filled with quiet disbelief. Kieran smiled gently, exactly as he had in the herb garden hours earlier. A throne can command respect. Wealth can attract admiration. But only genuine kindness is freely given when there is nothing to gain. That is the rarest treasure any kingdom can possess. As those words settled across the silent ballroom, many people realized that the greatest lesson of the evening had not come from the arrival of a king. It had come from the unnoticed compassion of the woman almost everyone had failed to truly see. Evelyn stood motionless as the silence settled gently over the ballroom, feeling hundreds of unfamiliar eyes resting upon her for the first time in her life. It should have frightened her, yet the only face she could truly see was Kieran's. The calm servant who had accepted a simple piece of bread with quiet gratitude was the very same man every kingdom respected as the Alpha King. Somehow neither image erased the other. They simply became one. Kieran took several unhurried steps toward her, crossing the polished marble floor while every noble guest instinctively moved aside to clear his path. No one spoke. Even the musicians remained perfectly still, their instruments resting quietly beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. When he finally stopped before Evelyn, his expression carried the same warmth she had first noticed that morning in the kitchen pantry. There was no distance created by his title. No pride created by his crown. Only sincerity. Evelyn, he said gently, speaking her name with the same natural ease as though they were still standing beside the herb garden. She looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. Your Majesty. I did not know. Kieran smiled softly. That is exactly why today mattered. He reached into the pocket of his plain linen vest and carefully removed the small weathered tin of herbal salve she had given him hours earlier. Holding it where she could see it, he said, You believed this belonged in the hands of an ordinary servant. You never imagined it would one day rest in the hands of a king. Yet you gave it away without hesitation because you believed someone else needed it more than you did. He paused before continuing. Nothing about this gift changed after you learned who I am. Its value came from the kindness that placed it there. Evelyn felt emotion rise quietly inside her chest. She had spent years believing the smallest acts of compassion disappeared unnoticed. Standing before her was living proof that they had not. Kieran slowly removed the rich royal cloak resting across his shoulders, the deep black fabric embroidered with silver thread that reflected the candlelight like stars beneath a winter sky. Without ceremony or dramatic flourish, he gently placed the cloak around Evelyn's shoulders. The luxurious fabric settled softly across her simple dress, yet the gesture carried far greater meaning than the garment itself. It was not an act of display. It was an act of recognition. A quiet breath swept through the gathered guests as they watched the Alpha King honor the daughter almost everyone had overlooked. Lord Nathaniel lowered his head, unable to hide the regret filling his expression. Lady Beatrice blinked away silent tears as years of quiet assumptions suddenly appeared painfully small. Even Victoria looked toward her younger sister with new understanding, realizing she had mistaken gentleness for weakness all along. Kieran turned slightly so every person in the ballroom could hear his next words. A queen is not chosen because she speaks the loudest, wears the finest jewels, or commands the greatest attention. A queen is someone whose character remains unchanged whether she stands beside a throne or beside a servant carrying wooden crates. He looked back at Evelyn, his silver eyes filled with complete certainty. Today I searched for the future heart of this kingdom, and I found her long before anyone announced my arrival. Evelyn lowered her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed not by praise but by the realization that someone had finally seen the person she had always quietly tried to be. When she looked up again, she offered the same gentle smile that had welcomed a stranger into the kitchen that morning. Nothing about it had changed. Kieran recognized that simple smile immediately, and in that quiet moment he understood something every crown had failed to teach him. Trust was never built through power. It was built one unnoticed act of kindness at a time, until two strangers no longer felt like strangers at all. The ballroom remained wrapped in peaceful silence long after Kieran's final words faded into the warm glow of the chandeliers. No one hurried to speak. No one searched for the perfect compliment. For perhaps the first time that evening, every person present seemed to understand that they had witnessed something far more meaningful than a royal announcement. They had witnessed truth quietly reveal itself. Evelyn stood beneath the royal cloak still resting gently across her shoulders, feeling its unexpected weight while remembering the simple linen shirt Kieran had worn only hours before. It seemed impossible that an entire day could change so much without changing who either of them truly were. She looked toward the familiar service entrance where they had first spoken over fresh bread and steaming tea. The doorway remained exactly the same. Only her understanding had changed. Kieran followed her gaze and smiled softly. Do you know why I entered through the back gate instead of the front? Evelyn shook her head. Because the front entrance welcomes a king, he answered. The back entrance reveals a home. His quiet words settled gently over the room. Today I did not wish to learn how your family greeted a ruler. I wished to learn how they treated people who could offer nothing in return. He looked around the ballroom before continuing. A kingdom is not strengthened by grand celebrations alone. It is strengthened by ordinary moments that no one believes are important enough to remember. Many of the servants lowered their eyes with quiet emotion, realizing that the unseen work they performed every day had been noticed after all. Kieran then turned toward Lord Nathaniel and Lady Beatrice. Neither of them attempted to defend themselves. Regret had already spoken more honestly than excuses ever could. Nathaniel stepped forward slowly, his voice humble and sincere. Your Majesty, I spent years teaching my daughters how to earn respect from the world. Somewhere along the way, I forgot to learn from the daughter who quietly earned it every single day. Lady Beatrice gently reached for Evelyn's hands, her eyes glistening with emotion. Please forgive us. We kept waiting for you to become extraordinary when you already were. Evelyn looked at her parents for a long moment before offering the same gentle smile that had defined every hour of the day. Families grow together, she answered softly. Sometimes we simply need someone to help us see one another more clearly. Her forgiveness carried no resentment, only hope. It was another quiet gift freely given. A peaceful warmth seemed to settle across the ballroom as though the estate itself had finally exhaled after holding its breath all day. The musicians slowly resumed their melody, not with triumphant fanfare but with a gentle tune that filled the room with quiet joy. Servants smiled openly beside nobles. Guests who had spent the evening chasing appearances now found themselves thanking the people who had served them. Small conversations began where barriers had once existed. Kieran offered Evelyn his hand, not as a command from a king, but as an invitation from the man she had unknowingly welcomed that morning. She accepted it with calm confidence. Together they walked toward the open doors leading onto the moonlit terrace where a cool evening breeze carried the fragrance of roses through the gardens. Above them, the full moon illuminated the estate with soft silver light, and for a brief moment neither of them spoke. Words were unnecessary. The quiet understood them better than conversation ever could. Kieran looked toward the peaceful grounds where the day had begun with a servant's simple disguise and ended with a lesson that would be remembered throughout the Northern Territories for generations. He smiled gently and said, "The greatest gift I found today was never hidden beneath a crown. It was hidden inside a heart that never needed one." Beside him, Evelyn looked toward the stars, knowing that tomorrow would bring responsibilities neither of them could yet imagine. But whatever challenges waited beyond the horizon, one truth had already become unshakable. Power could open palace gates, but only kindness could open hearts, and sometimes the future of an entire kingdom began with a warm piece of bread offered to someone the world had forgotten to notice.